21. I didn't go near the Sternwood family. I went back to the office and sat in my swivel chair and tried to catch up on my foot dangling. There was a gusty wind blowing in at the windows, and the soot from the oil burnings of the hotel next door was downdrafted into the room and rolling across the top of the desk like tumbleweed drifting across a vacant lot. I was thinking about going out to lunch and that life was pretty flat, and that it would probably be just as flat if I took a drink, and that taking a drink all alone at that time of day wouldn't be any fun anyway. I was thinking this when Norris called me up. In his carefully polite manner, he said that General Sternwood was not feeling very well, and that certain items in the newspaper had been read to him, and he assumed that my investigation was now completed. Yes, as to regards to Geiger, I said. I didn't shoot him, you know. The General didn't suppose you did, Mr. Marlowe. Does the General know anything about those photographs Mrs. Reagan was worrying about? No, sir. Decidedly not. Did you know what the General gave me? Yes, sir. 3 notes and a card, I believe. Right. I'll return them. As to the photos, I think I'd better just destroy them. Very good, sir. Mrs. Reagan tried to reach you a number of times last night. I was out getting drunk, I said. Yes, very necessary, sir, I'm sure. The General has instructed me to send you a check for $500. Will that be satisfactory? More than generous, I said. And I presume we may now consider the incident closed. Oh, sure. Tight as a vault with a busted time lock. Thank you, sir. I am sure we all appreciate it. When the General is feeling a little better, possibly tomorrow, he would like to thank you in person. Fine, I said. I'll come out and drink some more of his brandy, maybe with some champagne. I shall see that some is properly iced, the old boy said, almost with a smirk in his voice. That was that. We said goodbye and hung up. The coffee shop smell from next door came in at the windows with the soot, but failed to make me hungry. So I got out my office bottle and took the drink and let my self-respect ride its own race. I counted it up on my fingers. Rusty Reagan had run away with a lot of money and had a handsome wife to go wandering with a vague blonde who was more or less married to a racketeer named Eddie Moss. He had gone suddenly without goodbyes, and there might be any number of reasons for that. The General had been too proud, or, at the first interview he gave me, too careful to tell me the Missing Persons Bureau had the matter in hand. The missing persons people were dead on their feet on it, and evidently didn't think it worth bothering over. Reagan had done what he had done, and that was his business. I agreed with Captain Gregory that Eddie Mars would have been very unlikely to involve himself in a double murder just because another man had gone to town with the blonde he was not even living with. It might have annoyed him, but business is business, and you have to hold your teeth clamped around Hollywood to keep from chewing on stray blondes. If there had been a lot of money involved, that would be different. But 15 grand wouldn't be a lot of money to Eddie Mars. He was no 2-bit chiseler like Brody. Geiger was dead, and Carmen would have to find some other shady character to drink exotic blends of hooch with. I didn't suppose she would have any trouble. All she would have to do would be to stand on the corner for 5 minutes and look coy. I hope that the next griefer who dropped the hook on her would play her a little more smoothly, a little more of the long haul rather than the quick touch. Mrs. Reagan knew Eddie Mars well enough to borrow money from him. That was natural. If she played roulette and was a good loser, any gambling house owner would lend a good client money in a pinch. Apart from this, they had an added bond of interest in Reagan. He was her husband, and he had gone off with Eddie Mars' wife, Carol Lundgren. The boy killer with the limited vocabulary was out of circulation for a long time. Even if they didn't strap him in a chair over a bucket of acid, they wouldn't. Because he wouldn't take a plea and save the country money. They all do when they don't have the price of a big lawyer. Agnes Lozelle was in custody as a material witness. They wouldn't need her for that if Carol took a plea. And if he pleaded guilty on arraignment, they would turn her loose. They wouldn't want to open up any angles on Geiger's business, apart from which they had nothing on her. That left me. I had concealed the murder and had suppressed evidence for 24 hours, but I was still at large and had a $500 check coming. The smart thing for me to do was to take another drink and forget the whole mess. That being the obvious smart thing to do, I called Eddie Mars and told him I was coming down to Las Lindas that evening to talk to him. That was how smart I was. I got down there about 9 under a hard, high October moon that lost itself in the top layers of a beach fog. The Cypress Club was at the far end of the town, a rambling frame mansion that had once been a summer residence of a rich man named the Cousins. Later had been a hotel. It was now a big, dark, outwardly shabby place in a thick grove of wind-twisted Monterey cypresses, which gave it its name. It had enormous scrolled porches, turrets all over the place, stained glass trims around the big windows, big empty stables at the back, a general air of nostalgic decay. Eddie Mars had left the outside much as he had found it. Instead of making it over to look like an MGM set, I left my car on the street with sputtering arc lights and walked into the grounds along a damp gravel path to the main entrance. A doorman in a double-breasted guard's coat let me into a huge, dim, silent lobby from which a white oak staircase curved majestically up to the darkness of an upper floor. I checked my hat and coat and waited, listening to music and confused voices behind heavy double doors. They seemed a long way off and not quite of the same world as the building itself. Then the slim, pasty-faced blonde man who had been with Eddie Mars and the pug at Geiger's place came through a door under the staircase, smiled at me bleakly, and took me back with him along a carpeted hall to the boss's office. This was a square room with a deep old bay window and a stone fireplace in which a fire of juniper logs burned lazily. It was wainscoted in walnut and had a frieze of faded damask above the paneling. The ceiling was high and remote. There was a smell of cold sea. Eddie Mart's dark, shinless desk didn't belong in the room, but neither did anything made after 1900. His carpet had a Florida suntan. There was a bar-top radio in the corner and a Savoy china tea set on a copper tray beside a samovar. I wondered who that was for. There was a door in the corner that had a time lock on it. Eddie Mars grinned at me sociably and shook hands and moved his chin at the vault. "I'm a pushover for a heist mob here except for that thing," he said cheerfully. "The local Johns drop in every morning and watch me open it, and I have an arrangement with them." "You hinted you had something for me," I said. "What is it?" "What's the hurry? Have a drink and sit down." "No hurry at all. You and I haven't anything to talk about but business. You'll have the drink and like it," he said. He mixed a couple and put mine down beside a red leather chair and stood cross-legged against the desk himself, one hand in the side pocket of his midnight blue dinner jacket, the thumb outside and the nail glistening. In dinner clothes, he looked a little harder than in gray flannel, but he still looked like a horseman. We drank and nodded at each other. "Ever been here before?" he asked. "During Prohibition. I don't get any kicks out of gambling." "Not with money," he smiled. "You ought to look in tonight. One of your friends is outside betting the wheels. I hear she's doing pretty well, Vivian Reagan. I sipped my drink and took one of his monogram cigarettes. I kinda like the way you handled that yesterday. He said, you made me sore at the time, but I could see afterwards how right you were. You and I ought to get along. How much do I owe you? For doing what? Still careful, eh? I have my pipeline into headquarters, or I wouldn't be here. I get them the way they happen, not the way they read them in the papers. He showed me his large white teeth. How much have you got? I asked. You're not talking money. Information was the way I understood it. Information about what? You have a short memory, Reagan. Oh, that. He waved his glistening nails in the quiet light from one of those bronze lamps that shoot a beam at the ceiling. I hear you got the information already. I felt I owed you a fee. I'm used to paying for nice treatment. I didn't drive down here to make a touch. I get paid for what I do. Not much by your standards, but I make out. One customer at a time is a good rule. You didn't bump Reagan off, did you? No. Did you think I did? I wouldn't put it past you. He laughed. You're kidding. I laughed. Sure, I'm kidding. I never saw Reagan. But I saw his photo. You haven't got the men for the work. And while we're on the subject, don't send me any more gun punks with orders. I might get hysterical and blow one down. He looked through his glass at the fire, set it down at the end of the desk, and wiped his lips with a sheer lawn handkerchief. You talk a good game, he said, but I dare say you can break 110. You're not really interested in Reagan, are you? No, not professionally. I haven't been asked to be. But I know somebody who would like to know where he is. She doesn't give a damn, he said. I mean her father. He wiped his lips again and looked at the handkerchief almost as if he expected to find blood on it. He drew his thick gray eyebrows close together and fingered the side of his weathered, beaten nose. Geiger was trying to blackmail the general, I said. The general wouldn't say so, but I figured he was at least half scared Reagan might be behind it. Eddie Mars laughed. Geiger worked that one on everybody. It was strictly his own idea. He'd get notes from people that looked legal, were legal, I dare say, except that he wouldn't have dared sue on them. He'd present the notes with a nice flourish, leaving himself empty-handed. If he drew an ace, he had a prospect that scared and he went to work. If he didn't draw an ace, he just dropped the whole thing. Clever guy, I said. He dropped it all right, dropped it and fell on it. How come you know all this? He shrugged impatiently. I wish to Christ I didn't know half the stuff that's brought to me. Knowing other people's business is the worst investment a man can make in my circle. Then if it was just Geiger you were after, you're washed up on that angle. Washed up and paid off. I'm sorry about that. I wish old Sternwood would hire himself a soldier like you on a straight salary. To keep those girls of his home at least a few nights a week. Why? His mouth looked sulky. They're plain trouble. Take the dark one. She's a pain in the neck around here. If she loses, she plunges and I end up with a fistful of paper which nobody will discount at any price. She has no money of her own except an allowance, and what's in the old man's will is a secret. If she wins, she takes my money home with her. You get it back the next night, I said. I get some of it back. But over a period of time, I'm loser. He looked earnestly at me as if that was important to me. I wondered why he thought it necessary to tell me all that. I yawned and finished my drink. I'm going out and look the joint over, I said. Yes, do. He pointed to a door near the vault door. That leads to the door behind the tables. I'd rather go in the way the suckers enter. Okay, as you please. We're friends, aren't we, soldier? Sure. I stood up and we shook hands. Maybe I can do you a real favor someday, he said. You got it all from Gregory this time. So you own a piece of him too? Oh, not that bad. We're just friends. I stared at him for a moment, then went over to the door I had come in at. I looked at him when I had it open. You don't have anybody tailing me around in a gray Plymouth sedan, do you? His eyes widened sharply. He looked jarred. Hell no. Why should I? I couldn't imagine, I said and went on out. I thought his surprise looked genuine enough to be believed. I thought he even looked a little worried. I couldn't think of any reason for that.